This talk needs absolutely no introduction. Who are these two guys? Let's start over there. Who's that?
Eugene Jarvis.
Mr.
Larry DeMar.
There you go. These guys have stolen so much money from everybody. It's absolutely embarrassing. They should be in prison. I used to ride my bike like 10 miles to play Stargate, and the only place that had it in San Jose and Cambridge. Just pedal away, go spend my 4 quarters. That's all I had. Pedal back home. So let's go.
Everybody knows us because we did this cool game called Asteroids back in 1979.
What?
We had the great honor, privilege, and fun of working together for a number of years. My first day in 1980, when I walked into Williams Electronics, I ended up being taken aside by these two rebels because it was an old pinball company that was getting electronics and getting computers and thinking about doing video games. And there were a lot of guys that had done things the same way for a long time. And there were two guys, Steve Ritchie and Eugene Jarvis, shaking everything up, and they were like, "Come on over here, come on to the dark side." and we worked together. I got to assist Eugene and Sam with a lot of work on Defender, which we're going to bypass because we're going to try and really focus on the big kids years and what happens after you make a game like Defender. So the instrumental question is, what do you do after Defender? If the first 2 idiots you hire create a game that ate 8 billion quarters, what happens if you hire 100 idiots?
Yeah, that's a well-known formula in the valley here. But these were also, go back to it, these were the two prototypes for the Robotron character. So, it may well have been a bunny. I mean, that's very close.
So the answer for hiring those 100 idiots was a studio called Williams Kidz. After the Defender project, they opened up they got this big building, gutted it out, put it together for engineering, and hired as many people that had heard of a computer that they could find, and put offices one next to the other, tiny offices with a bad HVAC system. And so we'll just, I'll let Eugene go through the goods and bads of Kidz.
This was the good. I mean, it was a really cool, creative environment. A lot of amazingly talented, crazy people who actually went on to do games like Stargate and Joust and others. And it was, the fun thing was actually we were working on a VR project. Because like, once you do Defender, what's next? I mean, VR, right? I mean, so we had actually we're using mechanically driven shutters synced up to the sync rate of CRTs. And, you know, it was about, 40 years before Oculus Rift, and it kind of sucked, so. But there was many other brilliant, equally brilliant ideas that we're working on. Okay, whatever. Okay, the bad, there was no ping pong table. You know. No personal chefs or massages, so this definitely wasn't going to work. Very crowded offices, a lot of noise. Larry mentioned the bad HVAC ventilation, which, and I mean, this was a staff that liked to code, they didn't like to shower much. You know, kind of again, a Silicon Valley, a long tradition started at Apple many years ago.
And Eugene and I had talked about being entrepreneurs, going and doing something on our own. where we could have a better interest in it. And we talked about it in and out, and we almost did it a couple of times. And it wasn't the money, and it wasn't the prestige, and it wasn't the independence, it was how uncomfortable this facility was. It actually caused us to finally pull the trigger on the idea. And then there's the mystery of what happened to the bathroom mirror.
Yeah. We won't go into that.
And then the final issue was after Defender, they're hiring tons of people, everybody's going, wow, you're making millions of dollars, what's in it for me? And they came up with, here's the Williams bonus plan, and it was really, it was a minimal reward, and then they spread it over 4 years, so you had to stick around and then make more games that were spread over 4 years, and we kind of, between the breathing our farts and looking at the compensation, we finally, made the decision, and we came to this man. We're gonna introduce several key players that were really a huge part of the Williams ecosystem. And it starts with Mike Stroh. There is not a more charismatic leader that I have met before or after. And he was the president of Williams during this period. And he could, the design group, we can call warring gangs, we can call big babies, prima donnas, whatever. The creative people have idiosyncrasies outside of their hygienic habits. And this guy had the magic of any two people could have any dispute, and I was in the center of several of them. And he would walk us in the room, and we would talk about it, and we'd all be hugging and kumbaya and working twice as hard to try to please Mike. And I think that's part of what drove it at that time, because everybody really wanted to please Mike.
Yeah, and he really personally recruited like all the majors, the big staff people. So he was an amazing, inspiring boss.
And like a sports franchise, he did what it took to get the guy that he wanted. He just didn't roll up with the industry as fast as we wanted it to happen. So we walked into Mike and said, Mike, we're leaving. And what can we do? The golden handcuffs, 3 years, whatever is going on. And he got the message that, yeah, we're doing this. And he said, before you boys do anything, I want you to get on a plane with me. And we're going to New York City to the chairman of Williams, Lee Castro.
The Godfather. He was an Italian guy, and in Chicago we call them Italians. And there were guys that showed up in the river every now and then. So it was a little bit.
Nothing to do with anyone at Williams, but there were people in the river.
Yeah, it was a little bit scary. I mean, we heard some stories, and I remember we got to New York and had some discussions and heated discussions, and I don't know why they even had an office in Manhattan, because really there was no business. It was all in Chicago, but I think they got better cigars in New York. They had good limos, so then he said, well, guys, think it over. Why don't you take a ride in my limo? And we've all heard about what taking a ride was about. So we had some different thoughts. But our idea of taking a ride was to go to Times Square, where and they didn't have the Lion King playing in those days.
This was 1981.
Yeah, and that was probably the longest playing feature there. Protesters, same guys who were protesting Death Race by Ecstasy. But yeah, so it's weird. It's like all these things are black and white, and things were actually in color then.
So after we drove through Times Square, the driver said, where do you want to go? And we're in New York City, and there's a lot of really cool attractions in New York City. But we said, can you take us to the Broadway Arcade? which is Steve Epstein's location. That's not their sign, it's the best I could do with clip art. It says Broadway City Arcade. We knew Steve Epstein well. We'd never been to the Broadway Arcade, and they tested a lot of our games, so we were getting reports on the machines. We put them out. This was one of the highest profile, important places, so we went to visit it, and that's their current place, Modern Pinball, because the Broadway Arcade was kind of a dive. It was.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, it was definitely down and dirty, but had great pinball and even video in the video era. And I think when the rent went to like, it was about the size of 2 men's restrooms, and when the rent went to like $50,000 a month, I think the business model didn't work anymore.
So we went back. We got done with our limo ride, went back, and they said, if you're gonna do this thing on your own and we can't convince you to stay, then at least do it for us. And we very quickly put together an agreement which gave us some money to do a game and gave Williams first right of refusal on the games that we developed. And it was kind of a comfortable idea for us because we were going to have to buy equipment and figure out whose electronics or what kind of electronic system to make, and then develop all the stuff. And so continuing with the Williams stuff we had started, that was an advantage. It was a real win-win. And we come to our next key player. You've heard of the fifth Beatle. This is the third vid kid. His name is Nate Dardick, and we were.
Guy on the second from the left.
That's Eugene's wife Sasha, and that's Nate's wife Joanne. And you got to remember, we are like 23 and 25 or something, and running off and starting a business was a little scary and a lot of unknown. And he is a brilliant business lawyer, a visionary. He really stood at our side to craft this deal with Williams, get it together, worked with us all the way through with really major business decisions and big discussions, and has been a lifelong friend for 35 years.
I mean, the best aspect of it, he was cheap.
He worked for, actually, the people, everyone here can relate to this, he worked for pinball machines in video games. we didn't pay him a lot of money for the legal work, but when we put in the contract that we will get 2 brand new copies of every game that we develop, he scratched out the 2 and made it a 3. And he's got quite a collection because he did this with Eugene and I, and then in our separate careers at Midway and Williams, got pinball machines and video games, and then represented Pat Lawler and got all the Pat Lawler games, and represented Steve Ritchie. So, but he's a great guy, a good friend, and really a lot of credit to him for a lot of the success that we had.
Amazing guy. I haven't heard from him in a while. I sent him a bill for all the games, and I haven't heard from him, but no, kidding, good guy.
So Nate worked with us, we crafted the contract with Williams, got it together, and this picture was actually taken at Mike Stroll's house, where I think we went out to sign the final contract. And you can see the smile on my face. We just got a big check to start development of a game, and Eugene is thinking hard about that game. You can see that right there. So the Stargate project is what came out of this, and the discussions that we had is Williams needs a new game in 4 months. 4 months? Are you kidding? 4 years? We could do that.
Yeah, I mean, it was, we kind of messed around at Kidz for 8 or 9 months and really didn't have anything. The 100 monkeys and typewriters just weren't coming through. And so, it was, all of a sudden it's like, okay. I mean, there were, I think, 500 people on the assembly line building Defender. And it was kind of like, well, do you guys want to be responsible for 500 people becoming unemployed? And so that was kind of a good motivator to do this 4-month project?
And our answer to that is, if you want a game in 4 months, the only game we could do in 4 months is Defender Deluxe. And they didn't like Defender Deluxe, especially in the time frame when Asteroids Deluxe had just come out. And so this is from that agreement, we decided to name it Super Defender. And this brought on a big discussion with the sales department. If you give me a Super Defender, they're gonna say it's the same as Defender. I can't sell that. Okay, we'll call it Stargate. No, I can't sell that either. What's Stargate? Who knows that? And it went back and forth for weeks. And you know, we're doing Stargate, we're doing Super Defender, and then
I
finally.
think we finished the game before that.
So the answer to Defender or not Defender became yes. We, you know, it was going to be called Stargate, but we're going to get that Defender in there to let everybody know and understand and whatever. So that's kind of the history of how that came to be. And our next key player is Paul DeSalle. When Eugene and I both started at Williams, he was the head of the software department. He's a great programmer, and he was our boss and manager. And once we had this new relationship with Williams, he became the third-party liaison for Williams for VidKids. So everything we did with Williams, we did through Paul. He is just a great organizer, efficient, delivers what he promises, and the best troubleshooter. The best, although he didn't find the enforcer bug. Okay, but outside of the enforcer bug, the best troubleshooter. I didn't find the enforcer bug either. We'll get to that.
Barry, you're fired.
Is that Neil or Don?
Yeah, they're both from the same place.
Right. And Paul, we worked side by side at Williams for a lot of years. He went on to run all of the development at Midway, went into the gaming business about the same time we did, and we've been good friends again for 35 or more years. Now I've done it.
It was backed up to the cloud, don't worry.
Okay.
Okay.
It's back.
Okay, I think we're back. We're back. Phew.
So this was our, so as we were starting Stargate, we had our state-of-the-art Defender development system with dual floppy disks. And it was interesting. This thing cost like 50 grand. And it had, you know, it wasn't that great. So it was horrible.
It was the same development system that we used for Defender, which, if everybody has heard that story of the last week, it was such a crappy system, we couldn't go around the development loop. We were out of time, and Eugene was patching all the changes in the memory and all the bug fixing.
Yeah, thank God there wasn't a power failure.
And again, to do a game in 4 months, we weren't about to go find a place and get hardware and get things going. So Williams said, here's an exerciser, but at $50,000, you're going to get one exerciser. Because we didn't have a place, we set up shop in my apartment. I had a 2-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park Avenue, Chicago. And Eugene worked the day shift and I worked the night shift, and we had that machine going 24 hours a day to make Stargate in 4 months. So, trying to decide what you do after Defender, the prime directive in my mind was don't alienate the passionate audience, and we had the experience to learn from Asteroids Deluxe, where the real hardcore Asteroids player had no use for a game that was harder and very different. And so we decided, what else? We're going to add new enemies.
So is the Asteroid Deluxe team here today? Just checking.
So we decided, we're going to add new enemies, add new features, and then the key thing that we had to come up with is we needed to provide a more challenging game for the accomplished player, and that lots of ways to do that, but they all violate rule number 1, which is don't alienate the accomplished player. The whole Stargate methodology was our solution to that, where we did this cool trick that only good players could do and gave you a giant reward and got you way into the game, and we thought we were, smarter than everyone. And at the same time frame, same show, Tempest is there, and it's like, oh, pick your wave. Play wave 10.
Yeah, no, Tempest was I remember we were testing Stargate in this arcade in Chicago, and Tempest kept out-earning us, and so we arranged an unusual power supply malfunction in that game.
And again, it was interesting that model was as effective, and it's kind of, in some respect, people will create their own challenge. We thought we were brilliant at the time. Of course, the prime directive of all game design, make it a kick-ass high-earning game, because we have to feed the hungry Williams machine, and that is keep the factory going. And that during all the days of Midway, all the pinball days, it's always, the game before you ends on this date, we're shipping whatever you got, whether it runs or doesn't run. And we were embarrassed some of the times by things that were cut out or the way things went, but compared to what we see as software development in 2016, I mean, people, and I'm watching my son, Ryan, are you in here, buddy, or are you chasing Pokemon? He's chasing Pokemon. And that game is the most unfinished pile.
I would love to fail like that.
And it is a brilliant pile. The guys in my studio all were playing Ingress last year. And when they announced we're going to put Pokemon in that, you're going to catch Pokemon, it's like, oh my God. I mean, it is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. It's fun to watch it on the news every night with all the real stories and all the made-up stories. Anyhow, that game just crashes every 3 minutes. They're having some server traffic issues, but it is a real unstable, not ready to be published item, so they're feeding some hungry forecaster that wants to work on the next quarter's results. It's really the same principle. I tried to dig up stuff, and one of the Exidy guys was saying, oh, all the stuff he threw out that he knew people would love and wish they could have. I found some gems, and I found a lot of stuff just I can't find, but this was the sketch that we made and sent to Williams about how to turn a Defender panel into a Stargate panel. And it's got various measurements and Vizzo buttons added, but it's, this is currently 3 3/4 inches, now make it 4 1/4, so on and so forth. And obviously it became that with the cigarette burn.
The general rule of design for us in those days was, when in doubt, add another button.
And it's really remarkable, because when Defender came out at the first AMOA show, it got panned because the controllers were so complex. And I look at these PS3 and these Xbox games and the controllers and the sticks and the buttons, and I'm like, Defender, that's a baby toy. This has some of Eugene's scribblings about we're going to put the Stargates at random points. They weren't so random, but they made it to the game, and we have a higher elevation. And we found this. This is how art was done. You didn't hire an artist. You didn't get Photoshop or deluxe animation in a previous generation. You got out a piece of graph paper, and every square is a pixel. This is what a man looks like on the surface of Defender. There's a few animations and they walk, but that is the shape. And we were working on this spaceship where it would, hold 3 men, and it would come and abduct. Instead of a lander taking 1 guy, it could, take 2, 3 men, and the lights would be spinning. So
Yeah, this was pre-Maya. And in fact, we had to, this is a primitive age, and you had to actually go out and find a Mayan to do the artwork.
That's where it came from. And then we found this one, which I blow up here. This is actually the Stargate ship. We had 16 colors. 0 was black, and then the 15 colors that weren't black were 1 through F. And we had certain colors, like F was the hot white color, I think.
It was like a color animation.
And yeah, there were certain color registers were constantly animated. So if you do anything in color F, it does the bright white flashing. And if you do anything in color, whatever, 7, that's the laser. It's going through the rainbow colors.
There was EEF.
Yeah. I'll defer to the man that put the color set together.
Def Jam.
So this is again how we would make the ship, it's those numbers at those positions, and that's kind of the shape.
You kind of memorize the colors, so after a while you knew that 1 was red and 2 was blue, and so you didn't even need to put the colors. You just kind of wrote it out, in text, which programmers love.
Yeah. And then these were some of the original drawings for the Munchies, which they are the beta assisters in Stargate. We've got a square one here and a round one here. And our legal people said, you better think twice about using the round one. So that's why all the Munchies in Stargate were square. And that's just a screen of all the enemies, and your 3 square Munchies are down here for those that haven't seen the game or have a short memory. And I love this picture. It's just, how many guys and things can you put on the screen at one time? But that's pretty much the full cast of characters. Okay, this is going to be a very short section. Get your cameras out. We're not going to talk about this much. There's an Easter egg in a bunch of the games after Defender got knocked off. They weren't for fun or for novelty. They were to put an encrypted copyright message on the screen in case our game got knocked off. And it's really interesting that Defender was wildly successful, and it got knocked off all over the place. And we've never been knocked off since. And so it's the message, the DMA. Nothing was ever as wildly successful. And so as everybody's we put so much effort in stopping people from knocking off. I want to have a game that's good enough that people will want to knock it off. Okay? And we just went crazy.
Yeah. Well, it was amazing. What an amazing thing was there was a court case, I think it was in France, about Defender. And the guys had ripped it off, and they were arguing that a video game, since it's different every time you play it, and is as much a function of the player as it is of the game itself, that it's not a copyrightable entity because it's different every time. And it's interesting. I think they actually won that case, if you believe it. But somewhere along the line. I guess it became, declared actually a work of art, and so.
And the games have been pretty successful.
Yeah, nobody's ripping off anything anymore. It just doesn't matter.
So I dug these cameras out because I'm not going to talk about them. We can figure it out. The Robotron one has been published. That's on Arcade Classics in the interviews. And then here's one for NARC. There is one in Blaster. I forgot it, and I don't have the energy to go into the source code to figure it out because it is all cryptically done so that you can't find it or detect it.
Yeah, so we call it an octopus because you have to hit like all those 6 buttons at the same time.
So Yada, 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 Stargate's done, it's a hit. 4-month crisis averted, the line runs, everybody eats. And Big Kidz moves to Halsted Street.
They still had a few mattresses left, so that was good for some all-nighters.
We were at a storefront on Halsted Street that has now become Miss Betting Experts. So we moved in between Stargate and Robotron, and this was my office. This picture was taken post-blaster because you can see the blaster stick on the prototype. And we used one computer system here, which we'll look at in a moment, to do our software development and code generation, and then we would transfer the program to the target system, which was run over here for debugging. And we wrote our own debugger, we wrote our own assembler, we wrote our own editor. The tools, they were out there, they weren't very good. And it really makes a difference in the tools today. What's happened in software development tools is amazing, and you see it in all of the things that people are doing. You see people doing new video games, you see people creating pinball companies, and it's phenomenal. You have the case where at Midway in the late 90s, I think it was in Smash TV or Total Carnage, somebody put the game of Robotron, a playable version of Robotron, as an Easter egg into the game, in an afternoon. We spent, we killed ourselves for a better part of a year. And somebody, with the better tools, better art, better everything, was able to just, fine, let's do Robotron. Okay, what am I doing tomorrow?
You gotta figure out how to make it crash every 3 minutes.
Tomorrow we're doing Cruise in USA's history. This was us in that time frame, again in the blaster time frame in Eugene's office. We didn't all have iPhones and take a lot of pictures, and so it's really just a few shots to see where we were. These were the computers we used compared to the exercisers. These things were rock stars. They were faster. They always worked, and we loved them. They're made by a Chicago company called Gimmicks, and they were 6809 based, which sort of led us in that direction because that was our processor in our video games. But it really wasn't relevant. Just like the processor in your game now, it doesn't matter. You're using an Intel chip to do your development. But they were great systems with kind of show the times. We had if you look at there's paper with all kinds of notes on each of the things, and I've got them here. This was all the different projects we were working on. And when we finally got hard drives, in between Robotron and Blaster, the first Winchester hard drives came out. For $4,000, we got a 20 megabyte drive.
$10,000.
For $25,000. Okay, we're 60-ish here. Okay, so make up your number.
That was 10 megabytes. It was 10 megabytes, which was, how can anyone use all that memory? Inconceivable.
Which it was, because this, it had no directory structure. So when you looked at what was in your computer, you got one long list of files.
Yeah. Kind of like Windows 10.
So we created a methodology that the first 2 digits of every file name is associated with a project. And so by saying directory, everything that starts with SG, you get all the Stargate files. RR was Robotron. So these were all the different projects, and they did all fit on the 20 megabyte drive. It was 20. And,
dude, it was 10!
and there were 15 megabytes left on the 20 megabyte drive. Now you take one high-res picture and it doesn't fit on that 20 megabyte drive. So it's just amazing. In our computers, we used a 2 megahertz computer. Now we're using 2 gigahertz computers. and we had 56K of memory, which is about 300,000 times less than the development computer I use now with 32 gigabytes. So it's been remarkable. So we want to talk a little bit about development after Stargate. We're now in an office and we're a real company, and Eugene's going to do a game, and Larry's going to do a game, and we're going to just rock the world. So Eugene starts with Robot Wars.
Yeah, that was the original name, Robot Wars. And it was, you know, the idea, I mean, the ultimate ambition in those days was to create an entirely new game and a whole new thing. And, you know, I remember like, at one point I go, gosh, you know, it'd be really cool to do a basketball game, you know, nobody ever did that. And then like some other company did a basketball game. And I was like, okay, they did that, okay, that'll be it for basketball. And so we had to think of something else. So, you know, I guess into robots, I really dug the game Berserk, really. So I guess we didn't really create a new genre, we just kind of ripped one off, you know, in the tradition of video games. There was an interesting, I don't know how many people had Commodore PETs. Oh my God, poor souls. It was an interesting, it was a pretty bizarre computer. And there was a game called Chase, and which probably no one remembers. Okay, right here. Okay. And I think they had little like pi signs or something that chased you, or it was like, you know, ASCII.
It was all character based.
It was an ASCII game, but it had like a screen. I mean, it was a 2D ASCII game, and it was pretty cool. And I guess were they robots or was it just our imagination? I forget, but.
You called them robots?
Yeah.
It was 35 years ago they're robots.
I think they were just pi signs, but whatever. It was kind of a really cool game. I liked it. And then obviously Berserk, which I thought was an amazing game. But I was really frustrated with Berserk that you had to move towards something to shoot it. And kind of thinking about that game for a while, came to the conclusion that why not have a separate stick for firing and shooting. And so that was the big.
And we both loved Berserk. We played a ton of it, and it was a really nice basic set of rules that made a really fun, engaging game. And it was all very, you know, mostly tactical. And it was a lot of fun at the time.
And so, you know, obviously we were influenced by our predecessor games, which, you know, we love to recycle our code, like all good programmers. And although anyone else's code, do you know what the definition of spaghetti code is? Is it? What is it? It's no. Actually, that's true. Yeah, close. The spaghetti code is.
Weren't we just talking about the difficulty code in Robotron?
Right,
To make
right,
it
that's
difficulty
true.
11.
Yes.
That's the definition of spaghetti
That
code.
was 60 years ago.
Okay.
The definition of spaghetti code is code that someone else wrote. That's the definition of spaghetti code. So anyway, so we kept going here, and the dual joystick was a cool thing.
Yeah, this was Eugene's light bulb, and it was brilliant, and you know, it made the game. It totally was revolutionary. There've been a lot of games that have followed it using that control.
Well, the surprising thing is it really didn't catch on for many years.
It's
And-
catching on now.
Yeah, later in the new millennium. No, it really, I was shocked. I thought every game was going to have a dual joystick after this. And partly it was just the inertia of like the Atari console only had one joystick and the Nintendo console only had one joystick. So there was this kind of an inertia of singularity of single joysticks. And so it took a while, but I guess finally when like the PlayStation, Xbox came along, it became simple.
All right. Well, Eugene was beginning to get Robotron it into shape, I started a game that we called Conquest, which not many people have heard much about. It was a 2D space scroller. Think of Defender, really pushed out into 2 dimensions. It had a scanner. It used the Omega Race control, which is a spinning wheel in your left hand instead of a joystick, like Tempest or like Omega Race. So that spun your ship around, into 24 positions, and then thrust and fire in the right hand. And it had this really cool Defender style of ship mapping. It's kind of a subtlety in Defender, but your ship is, whichever way you're pointed, your ship moves to where you can have a lot of screen in front of you to see and deal with the enemies. So when you hit reverse, it slides back this way. And again, this was extended into 2 dimensions, so as you're running around, it's always sliding all over the place. Okay, who knows what that's a picture of? Come on, video game aficionados. It is a PCB, it's from a particular game, and there's a particular reason. You can't see it here. Can we turn off the lights? I guess not. Okay, this is from the original Computer Space game. And
that was the first arcade video game. It was by Nolan Bushnell.
Right, it was in that cool fiberglass cabinet that was red or blue. And maybe this will help.
Here we go.
Oh yeah,
Okay, that helps a little. And so if you look up here, this is what's called a diode memory. You actually can see by the placement and the positions of the diode, the spaceship in that game at all its different rotations. There it's straight up and down. There it's 45 degrees. There it's 60 degrees. And the reason that I bring this up is that I'm not an artist, we were programmers. We can bring the lights back up. We were programmers putting dots on graph paper to make enemies, and I didn't know, to save my life, how to rotate something around and have it look the same, but they did it in this game. Okay. And so since they did it in that game, I could take and just copy their diodes, and there's the position. So you can see, that's the nose of the ship, those are the 2 little fins. And then this red X is where the software fires the bullets out of. It has, whatever orientation it's in, it has to know where the nose is. So that's why there's the red X on each copy of the picture. And then computers, microprocessors, especially using assembly language, they add, they subtract, you can even multiply in a pinch, but they're really not good with sines and cosines. So to do 24 positions of rotation, it was a matter of creating this map of the 24 assignment coordinates, looking up the sines, cosines, turning it into a table which gives you both the amount in the X and Y axis for each position, but the maximum, so that as you're thrusting in any direction, you're going to be going at the same linear speed, no matter how the ship's pointed. It's a bunch of math geek stuff, but
Yeah.
I couldn't find the original good Robotron stuff, so you get to hear about Conquest.
Actually, this was a very early version of Ruby on Rails.
And we actually got as far as getting the world running, and this, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of slides. So the ship was, you were able to thrust and fire and move the ship around. There were enemies on there, enemies in the world. You can see a couple of guys on the scanner. You can't really see here, but there's a rectangle. Oops.
Ooh.
Okay, we're getting there. We're getting there. There's a rectangle here where your ship is, and that little dot is your ship. And again, I'm sorry, we don't have more contrast. So there's the little computer spaceship rotated sideways, kind of looking like it's shooting a couple of fireballs. When you hit something, it exploded with these concentric circles that went out, which looked really cool and was kind of fun, and turned into the time tunnel in Blaster, that same software that was making those circles. if you remember that game.
It shows you kind of the inherent difficulties of making a rotational, 360-degree rotational game in raster at the resolutions of that era. Probably would have been better done as a vector game, but we didn't have that hardware. But it's
There was an interlude. Remember the side road towards the color vector hardware we took? But that's for another seminar.
right. We wasted a few.
We did work on bringing up a color vector system at Williams, and the hardware was it never worked, and it kind of got set aside, and we were done. But in this time frame, we got word that Williams is doing a 2D scrolling space game, which we all know is going to become Sinister. And so we're thinking, let's see, they got their in-house game. It's gonna come out first, and they can, make that game or make our game and pay us royalties on it, and so on and so on. And we got worried. and we got worried, and then we also heard that Stern was coming out with a sequel to Berserk, which is now going to mess up our robot game. So our response to that was to put Conquest aside, where it has sat forever since that day.
So we had we came up with Candy Crush instead, right?
And I put Conquest aside, and Eugene and I worked together to bring Robotron to completion.
Yeah. So yeah, the Robotron thing. So the idea was again to contrast that to Defender and Stargate, and also since we didn't have much bandwidth hardware-wise to really scroll things with hundreds of robots on the screen, so we made the limitation of the game a feature, and so it's a confinement game, which is really cool. It's like freedom really sucks, and you really being confined is actually really fun. So that's it's kind of has that, but it really creates a lot of tension when you're confined. The other idea was the player starting in the center of the screen, as opposed to like Space Invaders, a lot of the other laser-based kind of games. Everything comes down from the top, you're in the bottom. The idea was, okay, what do we do to create even a more adrenaline rush? And that was to have stuff attacking from all four sides simultaneously at the beginning. And so it was just total, incredible, getting it from every direction, pretty much just completely overloading your brain and creating an incredibly difficult game. And so to counterbalance the difficulty of the game, having a really incredible weapon in the dual joystick kind of balance that game. So obviously anytime you create a really dangerous and difficult enemies and confinement, you need to counterbalance weapons, and vice versa. Every time you give the player a big weapon, then you have to make the enemies that much more difficult to kill them off. So it's all
Right on the tanks.
It's all an illusion. It's all an illusion. So this is, kind of you get that fight or flight, you get kind of sweaty, complete, it really was, early era of video games was about your survival instinct. It was like, how do we, because we didn't have, elaborate plot lines and dialogue, and we couldn't hire, Spielberg and get Johnny Depp to play the pirate. So we had to really kind of work at your just adrenaline, tension, survival instinct, kind of go for the strongest human emotions possible to really get the player involved. And so the story that essentially that was an idea to kind of make you emotionally attached to these characters. And so the idea is, well, who are you more attached to? That's your family, maybe. There are some people that probably would rather have a family of very loyal robots, but most of us are very attached to our family. And so the idea was to really pull at the emotional strings of the player. And so the first prototype, we were talking about, Larry and I were talking about Defender, and Defender, we spent about, 6 or 7 or 8 months before we even got a playable game because of all the technical aspects of developing an entire new system, new hardware, and all the flying mechanics and flight mechanics and the
Flying, scanner, collision detection.
Yeah, they like collisions, things like that. And so, but with Robotron, we had all those systems working, and it wasn't a scrolling flying game. So we were able to create we wanted to create a very quick prototype. And so the most basic thing was get the player in the middle of the screen, and then create a bunch of robots. And what's the easiest routine to write and most menacing is just the robots go toward you and try to kill you. Very, very direct. Kind of like Tesla autopilot mode. And then we threw in some electrodes out there to kind of kill you. And then the idea was also that you could use the electrodes, which in the Commodore PET game Chase, you could kind of use these mines to, if you stood between a mine and a robot would just walk into the mine. So same idea. You try to lure the robots into the mines.
The first version really was an attempt to do Eugene's version of Chase. It was the robots leading into the electrodes, which was interesting. It was interesting, but it needed more.
Yeah, so it was passive aggressive, which is very, very popular, type of thing in the corporate environment today. But it's funner just to kill your boss. So here we go. So it just was amazing. So start out maybe with fire to the robots. You give the guy the firing, and you just kill him in like 3 seconds. So that wasn't very fun. So the neat thing was
more robots.
Yeah. So it's really the cool thing is we had this. Actually, it was a multi-threaded operating system. So each robot had its own little thread of code, and you could very simply just type in a number and create 10 of them, get 20 of them, 30 of them. And so it was like, well, this game's so easy, create 50 robots, boom. And they all jumped in at a random location. And then we tried that, and it was more and more fun. And then at some point we did like 128, which was a nice binary number. I think that was just how much memory we had or something.
That was the number of processes we could have threads.
Yeah, and that was insane. It was just insane, and this was after about 3 days. We go, wow, this game's kind of fun.
And it was really interesting because I wish we had a picture. We had 2 Atari joysticks, like strapped down to a piece of wood. The Atari 2600.
Yeah, we screwed them into a piece of wood.
And as the robot count went up 5, 10, 15, 20, we probably got it up to about late in the game like 50. And then we kept working on the game, and then we got in a real control panel with Wicco joysticks, the ones that were on the final game. And again, it's the better control needs, better enemy, better power needs better enemy. 50 robots was like nothing. Okay, 60, 70, 80, 90. There's about 100 in the 9th wave, every wave that ends in 9.
Yeah, and but that was eventually you could pretty much overwhelm the player, but it became became a trivial game. So we realized we needed more enemies, we needed to create a little more interest here to create more variety.
Yeah. But the coolest thing that I've never seen before or after was after 3 days we were really having fun playing the game with 50 grunts and Atari joysticks and the electrodes. And today it's 20 times worse when you get a design team with 20 guys on it, and everybody's doing a little bit of this, and 6 months later, they kind of first put it together for the first time. So it was remarkable. I've never seen anything like it before or since. And now we have to go from the basics to make it a cool game.
And so the thinking of the characters, the idea was to make each character obviously unique with that unique capabilities and to have a unique style of fighting, so it would make the game, truly interesting. And each enemy would be, you'd have to study that enemy and use a different tactic to fight that enemy. And there you go. And so the idea was kind of like a chessboard where you have 7 or 8 different pieces. You create this mix of, you look at chess versus checkers. Checkers, you just have little checker guys. And by adding those another 5 or 6 pieces, it creates a game that's like infinitely interesting, and you can play it forever.
Okay, we've got a lot of slides on the game design, and Eugene promised he would blow through these quickly.
Right. So here's the human. So this is the other mechanic, was have something in the game that you can't kill, and that is something you need to rescue. So it's basically, you go and eat your family, which it is kind of violent, really. So that's how you save your family, by eating them. And there's like a progressive scoring based on that. So that's kind of the secretary's goal. Because the game can really get trivial if you're just killing everything, in the universe. So this was, you had something you needed to eat and you're kind of saving them. Enemies will kill them. So it really created a, kind of overloading the overload.
It was a huge risk-reward thing, because you're trying to get 5,000 points to get that extra man. And if you die doing it, it essentially costs you 25,000, which is the value of that man. And so it just becomes a real greed and a trade-off, and everybody who's played the game much really kind of gets it. And then you get good enough to where you get the man and don't die, and it kind of feeds the cycle.
And then so the Hulk was, I guess, the second enemy that was created, and the idea was just to make something that you couldn't kill. And he was really inspired by the character Evil Otto in Berserk, who was also a character you couldn't kill. And so it was and it really added a dynamic, because it was like having a moving wall in the maze, where you could push them around a little bit.
Which was huge, the tactical of running around and getting cornered, just being able to fight them off to get through the crack.
You could push them a
was
little
really
bit.
big.
So there was but they were indestructible.
And they were really indestructible, no trick way to kill a Hulk.
Right, the enforcers, actually there was this thing of spawning enemies, which was kind of an interesting mechanic, where you would start out with kind of an enemy generator, and then it would spawn enemies. And so if you killed the generator, you'd kill generations of enemies. If you didn't, then you kind of had a population explosion. And so the enforcer was kind of the first one of that. And we were lean on artwork, so rather than animating him, he just floated, which was like 1 frame. That was pretty cool. The other interesting thing was some of the projectiles. In order to make them more interesting, rather than just shooting them at the player, utilizing concepts like random accelerations, actually random aiming about the player, randomly having an error, and then also having them slide on the border, or some shots later would reflect. It's an interesting kind of aspect of the shot velocity was we were using arithmetic shift instructions to create the velocity of the shot. And the side effect of that was the farther the enemy was from you, the harder they would shoot at you, which was really bizarre, because they're actually more dangerous. If you run away from them, they become more dangerous. So and that counterintuitively, you have to go closer to them to be safer and kill them. So
and the shots had a curve to them.
Yeah.
So when you were close, they just dribble away. When they're far, they throw fastballs.
Yeah, so it was there was a lot of non-intuitive things that really kind of screw with your mind. And this was some code for you guys if you want to.
The cool thing about this is there's a subroutine column here that's called twice, which is get the velocity. That's when the enforcer changes his direction. He calls it at the start and he calls it right here. Besides those two subroutine calls, this is the entire program for the enforcer. That's 100% of what drives the enforcer. The get velocity is looking at the player's position, and it has a bug where they drift away and slide up the walls, which I can't figure out how to control. Because I was trying to get a picture.
But I mean, JavaScript was very powerful.
But it was amazing how you could get clever and do a real lot with a real little. That was the entire algorithm.
And then the brain was the next enemy, and kind of he, I guess, is the second enemy that could kill humans. The Hulk could crush them to death. The brain actually would reprogram them and turn them into enemies known as progs, and kind of like the mutant really from Defender. So that was the brain, and we had the cool like bulging veins and heads and stuff.
And it was cool because every fifth wave is the bonus round. I mean, that was your opportunity with all the mommies or daddies or Mikeys. But it wasn't a given that you were going to do well or get a big bonus. Some brainwaves didn't go well, and a lot of them with your skill were amazing.
Yeah, the risk reward. And their projectile was known as the cruise missile, which was a kind of a randomly seeking projectile which actively seeked you, and with certain randomness, and a very pesky kind of thing, but again, very different, totally different algorithm. The interesting thing was the Mikey, what's known as the Mikey bug. Are you guys familiar with it?
Yeah.
Okay. This was a bug that was actually we didn't discover this for like 4 or 5 years. I'm sure some player, probably discovered it on the second day. But being the developers, we didn't make it. But the whole idea is if you kept Mikey alive on the first brainwave, then they wouldn't eat any other humans, and you could get like this massive bonus. And actually, every brainwave there is one of the humans is kind of a Mikey. And if you can tell who they're seeking for, and if you can protect that person, then you can keep all the humans alive and get massive bonuses. And so this was like late in the game.
One more thing.
This was late in the game, and we were having a lot of fun with the game. And there's always you don't know when to stop. You just don't know when to stop.
We work with a lot of the most creative people and best designers, and almost universally, the greatest of the great designers are terribly insecure. And so part of what makes their stuff great is that they 3 ratchets after it's great, they keep going. And
yeah, that was kind of the we were having an amazing amount of fun with the game, but for some reason there was this nagging thing like we need one more thing, and we have to, friggin' Tempest is still making a lot of money. So we gotta have the final death blow, and we can only, we can't go around the country destroying all the power supplies. So and this was kind of, I guess, in some ways, a brainchild of Larry. And this was the tanks, which the idea was to create another enemy that's like completely different from all the others. And although, yeah, the spawning was similar to the Enforcer with a quirk would spawn the tanks. But the interesting about the tanks is unlike all the other projectiles in the game, it had bank shots. It was kind of like playing pool, kind of playing pool with the player. And it was just, obviously you guys, anybody who has played Robotron, this is like the most horrific enemy out there because it's just, the style of play is so different. And
the tanks ruin many a good game. You get your men racked up, you've got 6, 7, 8, 10 men, and you're cruising along and you hit a 7 or a 12 or a 17. And it's a sad day sometimes.
Yeah, and for some reason there's some really bad code in there. And sometimes they'll just all shoot at once at you for like about 10 shots, and it's just like.
And I assume people know about the tank shot bug, where they run out of shots?
Oh, 21 shots?
Yeah, there's a missing decrement statement to decrement the shots in existence when they die, so it's keeping track, there's never more than 20, and so after the 20th bullet, after you dodge the 20th bullet, they just run around stupid. The fiercest enemy.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, sometimes, you know, when you dodge the firestorm, there's probably just 2 or 3 bullets left that you go, okay, we can do it, we can do it.
Yeah, that's another interesting point. So I guess the AI at
Consider the tools of the time.
right. This was pre-series.
And it was really a signature of all the Williams games. The Japanese games were really mostly predictable and scripted, and we set up all the scenarios randomly with lots of randomness. And you know, Ryan, are you back from Pokemon? No, still not here. He was here in between. I saw him. But there's a new Pokemon gym. I think the blue team just took it over and down the hall. Anyhow,
Yeah.
he tells me the game's unfair. It's unfair, and you know, sometimes the randomness gives you happiness, and sometimes it gives you really tough. But as we have learned and will see, there are people that have conquered this game despite all the adversity that we are just amazed by. As a matter of fact, David Gomez, stand up.
Yeah. This is come on, David.
This is David Gomez. We're going to get to David if we don't run out of time. But he is the master of all Robotron of all time, and it's amazing. And there are hours and hours of it on Twitch if you want to watch it.
I mean, there may be some people in this room that don't agree with that.
And it's a challenge. It's a challenge. As a matter of fact, my money's on David, and we'll take all comers.
All right. But yeah, so the idea of artificial intelligence through random number generation, the really interesting thing is people will personify the random number. You know, they will say like, this guy really hates me. You know, it's like, you know, and it, like it draws a bunch of bad random numbers in a row, and it's like, you know, this game hates me, it's killing me, you know, I suck. You know, like you start having a personality crisis, and then you get all these great random numbers, and it's just like, oh my God, I'm
great,
I'm amazing, I'm a genius, you know, and so it's you really take this stuff personally, you know, and so you really associate a lot more intelligence with this, and you know, it's interesting. Quantum mechanics, pretty much the more they look, the more it's like, you know, with apologies to Einstein, it's like God does play dice out there, you know, and so it's kind of an interesting thing, so yeah, a lot of the whole game is all the arrangements of the numbers of the different enemies are scripted for each wave, but the where they show up is completely random every wave. And so there's just random number upon random number that went into Robotron. But there's a certain range of random numbers that's interesting, and so you have to kind of tweak them into that range that's interesting to a human, because I mean they could kill you in 32 microseconds. You know, it's not interesting. So you have to create a velocity and a human centered range of the random numbers that feels good. It's very playable. There's a lot of cool graphics things based on this horizontal, diagonal, and vertical explosions. We had this new chip that we did in the game, which was one of the earliest graphics coprocessors. And it could do some really cool fast memory transfers that were, you know, at a blazing speed of 1 megahertz. Pretty amazing. And
it moved a lot of robots. We could not have done the game without it.
yeah.
And that, And the game was, this was an era where games were done on a black background because it was too processor consuming to move the stuff, where you had to have specialized hardware to do that. And we always got a lot further with generalized bitmap where we could do anything anyway, but we lost some of the performance that some of the specialized hardware could perform. So that kind of closed the book on Robotron. I found this picture. That is my mother and me playing in a Robotron cocktail show at the AOE show where the game was launched in 1982. And here we are about 34 years later. So the game looks the same, but we're looking pretty good. Okay, and after Robotron, we heard Atari's coming out with their next console, and the 2600 owned the universe. They had tens of millions of these out, and game company after game company was making game after game, and the 5200 must be twice as good as the 2600. And we heard again before it came out, it's going to be a platform that is the Atari 800 computer hardware system. And so we came up with the idea, let's try and see if we can do an original new game. Is that me? Well, I guess everybody in this room has that ring.
The interesting, the arcade kind of business, the arcades were kind of dying. This was in the mid-'80s. And so it was like, hey, let's go into home video games. They'll never die, you know. And so.
And there really wasn't much in 3D. There was a Star Raiders game that Atari did for the 800 that was, sort of interesting. There wasn't any gameplay there, and it was graphically kind of nice. And it was a big seller on the 800. And we thought if we did a 3D game, then the best 3D we could do on that hardware, that if it was interesting, that when the 5200 came out, we were a winner. And we created the Game Blaster. Maybe many don't know, it was not a coin-op game. It was created for the Atari 800, then made the 5200. And that game, there's a complete working game for the 800.
There's a coin-op version out on the floor. Yeah, the durable cabinet.
Okay, we'll get there. So for 3D, you either use your fancy scaling hardware, or if you have an Atari 800, you figure out how to draw things different sizes. So this is when it's far away, a little closer, a little closer, a little closer. That was the man, the help, that was one of the rocks. We made these templates, and those are how we created those characters. And then we talked to Mike Stroh about that we were doing this. He said, "Oh, let me help you get it to Atari. I've got great relationship there, but put the cartridge on hold. Let's make this a coin-op first. We'll clean up there, and then your cartridge will be even bigger because of the power of the brand." And so we did that, and we hired artists.
Now, can you believe that? I mean, what is the world coming to?
We had two guys, John Sheldrake and Ken Roberts, who John actually came with us and did some of the Robotron characters. And then the two of them did all of the art for Blaster, which we actually made that leap from drawing on graph paper to letting artists draw on graph paper. And
we had some kind of pixel program.
we did. It was called Picasso.
Oh my gosh.
It actually ran on the Target system, which was really an odd. We have these development computers. They're character-based terminals. There's no VGA or CGA. It was NGA. There was no graphics. And so to do an art program, we used the Williams the Williams hardware platform, and downloaded like a game, an art package, and you use the joysticks on the panel to move from pixel to pixel and select your color, and that's actually they did everything.
Poor guys.
Man. And then the next step in that evolution was Deluxe Paint. is what we use for video games, and then the pinball automation stuff I think is done in Deluxe. So the arcade market totally bombed out, and Blaster was what it was. But the business was dying.
What was worse, the game or the market, right?
We have another hour. We need another hour to debate that, because this was not our best work. And it's really interesting. It's moving from 2D to 3D, and it's sort of the extension of the game in 3 days. There's so many things that you have to do to make things work right in 3D that too much of our development time got spent with the technology and not nearly enough with the intriguing gameplay. But we also learned it's really hard to do something as tactically engaging as Robotron in 3D, where all the enemies are this big because they're out in the distance. You know, you can't, moving around in 3D, you can't see your enemies because they're all this big when they're not right about to, blow up in your face. And so driving games have always worked well. And there have been a couple of 3Ds. Star Wars was very good. Buck Rogers was interesting. But it's really hard to make a game as challenging and interactive as the games we were making. And Blaster, we never got the gameplay to where we'd love to play it.
Yeah, it's super immersive, but in the kind of the God's eye 2D view, you have much more information about what's going on in the game. So you kind of make a deeper, richer game, where you're in kind of the intensity of 3D is really cool. You get this rush, but it's hard to develop the tactics and strategy in that format.
I forgot to ambush the crowd with my question. I'll do it after the fact, and I know it's not going to work. Who in the audience where Blaster is your favorite game? Yeah. And I knew I couldn't get anyone this way, but every game on that floor, no matter how stinky a turd it is, and there are stinky turds out there, is somebody's favorite game. Okay, you will come along, somebody, Blaster, oh my God! Can you say, wait, I have my Blaster marquee, can you sign it? And we've gone through that. Literally every single game, no matter what platform or what it is somebody's favorite game. And Blaster, again, it was not our best work, but it's just that phenomenon I wish I could have ambushed you guys before we done that. I did that at a seminar last year on pinball.
It was somebody's favorite game, Blaster?
No, it was a pinball seminar. I have a very strong feeling about certain pinball machines, and so including ones that I worked on. So the game was not what we would have wanted from what we envisioned, and the market totally collapsed. And the combination made it, a pretty short run, not very successful for Williams, not very successful for us. And so, okay, let's put out the home game now, which was done before the coin-op, and that market collapsed before the game got into that market. Atari actually licensed it from us, but they never produced it. And I've still got the chips from the original game. I've passed them along. I don't know if they're in any of the emulators, but
They are.
They are? Okay. So that was kind of it, and that kind of led to 1984. George Orwell didn't realize that would be the end of Kidz.
Yeah, it wasn't 2084, it was 1984.
So, as we were saying, the markets kind of went crazy, so Eugene said, I want to go back to California. He loves it here. He went to Stanford around the corner. And I ended up taking a little time off, and on a circuitous path found my way into the Williams Pinball Group. And then we, like every divorce, this was like a divorce, okay? It was not as hostile. But there were some lively discussions about who was going to get what. As partners, we bought a lot of stuff, equipment, games, furniture, and the like, and we went through that terrible process, got over the grieving, And then
I mean,
and I'm still grieving over that one.
the guy was going to buy everything. It was just...
And the scenario for that, I was staying in Chicago, and I had a studio apartment that I rented to move stuff in and kind of keep my development going. Eugene was fleeing Chicago and was selling everything, and so he found someone that to buy all this stuff, and he liked my desk.
As Larry had said, do whatever you do, don't sell my desk.
So we get to 1986, and Eugene's finished his master's, and he's back at Williams starting up a new video game group. I'm at Williams working on pinballs, and we look at the scariest scenario known to men on the planet. And why is this a scary scenario? Why? Because when you shoot that enforcer in the upper right corner, the game's probably going to crash.
You get carpets.
And there was a bug in Robotron from day one, and this is my bug, and it's time for me to come clean. Okay. And the worst thing about the bug is that we knew about it before the game was published. We didn't know exactly what or why, or were able to fix it. And we made all 20-some thousand Robotrons with this bug and it only happens when you've got 20 lives and 500,000 and are really cruising. And good players, great players learn in those games that you don't take that shot. It becomes another part of the skill. And David, am I correct? In your first 100 million game, you played it with the enforcer bug and beat it with the bug in the program. Is that correct?
No.
It's not that stupid.
I got to 60 million.
Okay. I watched that marathon. You played the 60 million. And again, they're doing this on Twitch, and it's really cool if you're very, 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 very into Robotron.
So it's basically a clipping problem where you're.
It's not.
Well,
It's not. That's why we never solved it. I know. This week I finally understand what the problem is. That's why we never found it, because I thought it was a clipping problem.
Okay, all right.
Real quickly, we're not going to do too much computer science 101, but this is a memory map, and this is address 0, and it goes down 256, 512, whatever, and you fill all the memory with the screen, and you're out here at whatever 300 times 256 is. The next byte in all of this memory is the same memory, and that's the RAM we use for our program. So we had a great situation where, the player would shoot a bullet, it would travel, and if the clipping program didn't detect it going off screen and get rid of that bullet, it would travel and you'd literally be shooting your program. Sorry. And so, in looking for this bug and knowing that we've shot so many programs so many times, we were certain, and until literally this week, decoding these bugs for this presentation, I had always believed that this diagonal explosion, which is going to go this way, was going into this nice little RAM area and corrupting the program, and that's what I looked hard for in 1982 and never found. And there it is. In the mix at the time, this isn't an excuse, this is just part of the decision-making process.
It was the hardware.
Yeah, it was the hardware. It wasn't the hardware. However, the graphics coprocessor or blitter chips were being developed. It's a long process to get all the circuits into a custom chip and mass produce it. And they created these boards which had all the circuitry that did exactly what the chips did. And they worked pretty well, and they almost ran at bus speed. You can see they've got some little upside down chips with wires on them, big antennas. So our development systems were a little flaky, and they crashed from time to time. And so, okay, it's the boards, whatever. And then the chips came. The first prototype chips came, and they had hardware problems. And then I went chasing this, shooting the RAM problem, and never found it. And we just didn't know, and I was blaming the hardware more than the software at the time, which I will admit, and we published the game.
The first programmer ever to do that, Larry.
To blame the programmer, or to blame the hardware, or to come clean? It only took me 34 years. So a sequence of events happened where this guy named Christian Gingras sends a letter to Williams. It's in November of '86. And hey, how can I find Eugene Jarvis or Larry DeMar? And I've got some aspects of their program I want to discuss with them. And then April 12th, so this is like 6 months later, I don't know how long it took Williams to respond, but 6 months later we get a letter. Hi, I'm Christian, I'm a student. I've been studying Robotron. I've gone through every line of code, and I found some bugs.
It's a very long winter up in Montreal.
And so here's mistake number one. And here's the detail. And mistake number two, and there's the detail. Mistake number three, and there's the detail. I guess 3 was a bigger mistake. And then mistake number 4, the unsolved one, is really the one that we're interested in. That's the diagonal explosion problem. And so Eugene and I, we go get out the listings of the code, and we discover mistake number 1 is accurate, number 2 is accurate, number 3 is accurate. They were all bugs or things that we did wrong in the coding that you can see when you look at the logic. None of them caused any malfunction in the program, so we never knew they were there. Nobody knew they were there. The game had been out for 4 years, and nobody knew them, and you couldn't know about them unless you studied and learned every line of the program and saw the mistakes. So we wrote Christian back. Here's our letter, and basically we found, yes, bug number 1 is right, there's the reason. Bug number 2, bug number 3, and he's investigating diagonal explosion, and we said, yes, please, we wish you luck, please work on this.
This was the first unpaid intern.
And we were so impressed with what he had done, we asked him to come in for a job interview at our expense, and he said fine, and he appeared. We're running out of time, so I'm not going to go through it, but this shows you, each one, this is what he wrote about the bug, this was our explanation, and this is in the code why it happened. This one, the bug is in code that's an error condition that never gets executed. And so that's why it didn't cause a problem.
So here is this is his listing right here.
This is the original listing. Right
He
here.
ran the code through a disassembler, and it looks like that. So all of this is put up by a disassembler. This is the disassembler's best interpretation. It's interpretation of instruction by instruction, but it doesn't have all the comments, and it doesn't have nice names for the labels. It just says, go to this address, and you have to look it up. Like here's 468, and something probably references 468. So anyhow, bug 1 was in an error handler. It never was executed. Bug 2 is really a hideous one because it was a really bad coding style where instead of using a label, the programmer said go to *+3.
Yes,
locations.
Larry.
And it should have been *+5, but it really should have been done with a label for anyone that writes software, not
You know, it was like, hey, this is a three character instruction. It's jumping over, go to star +3, but it measures the star +3 from here, not from there. And you know, it branches into the middle of an instruction, and when that happens, that's almost a formula for crashing. But the instruction is a subtract with carry from B from a RAM location, and B isn't used in this routine, and luckily B isn't revered by anyone that calls the routine. And so this bug also had no effect, but was totally discovered by a guy who studied every line of the program. And we wouldn't care that much about this until we get to the end of the story, which many of you know how it concludes. In the third comment, he says that you're missing a branch load of FO24. Well, there's a branch load of EX whatever 0, which is indeed FO24. Which ended up in the comment field of the instruction before it.
I hate when that happens.
And what's really neat is the editor that we wrote didn't have new line as a character, so you can't delete a new line to make that happen. There was some bug operation of our own editor that ended up dropping the new line there, putting the two lines together. And Christian informed us that the result of this is it's doing horizontal explosions, it's trying to do lots of them, but because that instruction's not there, it only allows you to do one horizontal at a time. Since they go so fast, nobody ever noticed. So that's it. And then Christian comes to Chicago for his job interview, and he's showing me what Eugene just showed you. And he's totally analyzed the diagonal explosion routine, which is 12 pages. It is a big, hairy routine. And this is kind of what his work looks like on it. Most of it's in French, his native language. It's his only language. He brought his partner, who was a translator for him when he was with us. And Christian lives in the San Francisco area now, and I sent him email and was hoping he was coming. You're not here, are you, Christian? Okay, Ryan? Is Christian chasing Pokemon? Okay. And this is
the source code.
What?
He's fixing the source code.
Oh, yes, he is. Yes, he is.
Actually, he found Where's Waldo.
Anyhow, this is the page where the bug was, and he's very, very carefully going through it. And when you get to the end of the line, the fix for the bug is putting in these two instructions, which if this thing hits 0 that you're decrementing, then you want to get the hell out of there and not do what's going to crash the program. Same applies there, and it was an index jump, it wasn't an explosion. It was an index jump, and if you indexed off of 0, instead of hitting a address to jump to, you hit some numbers that didn't mean anything, and the program went to space. So I learned that this week. You always can learn about your projects. Now, if we had the development system and all the software together, we would have just put those two instructions in there, run the assembler, run the linker, make the EEPROMs, here's your new version. This was 1986. We didn't have the computers, we didn't have the code, we didn't have anything. And so instead of doing that, what you do is a series of patches, which Christian wrote, and you take where the first problem is, and you just overwrite an instruction. We say jump to somewhere. So the control comes to where the problem is, you jump to somewhere in an empty block of memory, and there weren't many empty blocks, but there was enough. And he, of course, was French speaking, so his patches are un, deux, and trois. And then he put his initials and the date in there, which is 5 of 87. And I worked to then take, and we had checksums and we had booby traps in there, and these 2 bytes fixed those so that everything works right. And we made a new RAM 5, and I gave it to people, and it got around. People had it, but it wasn't really widely distributed, and most Robotrons still crash when you do that. So here's Christian with us at Williams. That's outside the front door. That was the listing of the program at the time that we were, going through and comparing. And that's Michelle. That is Christian's partner who came with him. And he's holding, those are the prototype boards for the Blitter, the graphics coprocessor that kind of is a souvenir. We're like, here, take these parting gifts and a box of rice-a-roni and thank you. And this is the room where it happened. This is my apartment, the second bedroom, which we developed Stargate in, that I have no pictures of. But Christian and Eugene played some Robotron in there, where it got filled with games. Once we moved to Halstead Street, my second bedroom got filled with games. And here's a picture of Eugene and Christian with Ken Fidesna, another one of the very, very key players to the Williams and Midway dynasty. He was there working with us. He was the leader of the Defender team. That was a Skunkworks project that he took. He hired me.
No, you
Hired Christian. No, there was immigration, and he was finishing college, and for the late wrap-up show, I've got the 7 letters in their entirety, and we can go through them. But so it kind of tells the whole story. I didn't know I had these till I started scouring for this. And there were 6 or 7 letters back and forth over a time period where he was going back to college and he was worried about immigration. And then we didn't hear from him for a long time, and then I found him on Facebook. So back to Ken Fidesna, he was the second human Superman at human interaction and recognizing talent, dealing with talent, solving people's problems, and making it all happen with a bunch of prima donna crybabies. He's a wonderful guy, a great friend, and was literally there from the day I walked in till the day that he turned up the switch at Midway.
Right, he was the general manager for 20 years, maybe 30 years.
And while we're on people, and I hear a couple of them rudely interrupted, there are some people in this room that we've worked with, including Dwight, stand up, Greg, stand up. I went to Bowen loosely.
I was just mentioning to Dwight how you talked about how Ken and Mike were the guys who protected people and solved problems. And it's funny because I always said that about you.
Yeah, Larry was our boss.
That's right.
Did the exact same thing.
Larry's the one who brought us all together and protected us from all of Neil and everybody.
He protected you against this wonderful guy, Ken.
And I had the best mentors. I mean, I had Eugene and Steve, and I think there's Steve. Eugene and Steve and Ken and Mike Stroll, and so it was a philosophy, and it was great and wonderful to be able to do that, for that department. Steve Ritchie, amazing designer, so passionate, so animated, and just
Not a mentor.
what? Not a mentor. Dwight is working with Steve right now.
Yeah, so...
At least twice. I've told myself I'm never working with him again. I'm currently doing my 6th game.
Right, well, yeah, he's really, not really a mentor, maybe more of a de-mentor.
Steve is great. Steve has lots of great qualities, and he's a great designer, but he was not my mentor.
I am so grateful that he was one of the first people that had an influence on me in the business. I worked with him on Black Knight and High Speed, pinballs, which were both really good games, great experiences, and at the end of each of those, I said, I will never work with Steve. We have remained great friends. I have great admiration, and he continues with all the ups and downs and craziness in the coin-op and in pinball. He continues to keep making great games, and he's a wonderful guy.
Yeah, no, actually, he came up with the name Robotron.
He did?
Which actually really was the name of an East German computer company, which is very interesting. That he suggested we called, the Robot Wars was going to be 2084. and Steve suggested the name Robotron, which it's kind of a cool name. Yeah, I kind of like it.
And this is a shot of Steve and Eugene in Reno at the Peppermill Casino playing one of my current company's games. It was called Cash King Checkers, and when they were there playing it, it was just, again, just so exciting for me to see them playing the current stuff, and so I got that.
Yeah, especially after Larry gave us the Easter egg for that one. Very exciting.
Okay, so now in the present, one of the coolest things is how loved this game is. There's so much competition, there's so many amazing games. There were so many amazing games then, but there is such a strong audience for it. And I discovered in 2014 that some people said, we're gonna break 100 million, we're gonna play the game for 24 hours, and a guy named Ken House did that. I think it was summer of 2014. And again, we got to watch it on Twitch. And when Ken House hit 99,975,000, for the first time in 34 years, when I start hearing the Freeman sound, Freeman sound, Freeman sound, it was like, oh, the bug that was in Defender when he hit 1 million, hit 990,000. Okay, we just kicked it down the road by adding 10 digits. And when we did that, we did it on Stargate, and it would have taken 4 days to do that, and we were. You've got to understand the hostile development environment. If there wasn't a problem that was real, you didn't fix it. And so when we did that, it was like, nobody's going to ever get 100 million. We don't have to worry about it. And nobody thought about it, and nobody knew about it. There were people claiming greater than 100 million, but nobody ever talked about this behavior, which really makes me certain that Ken House was the first 100 million. And then our crazy man holding up his camera over there decided, let me get there. David decided, I'm going to do it too. And he went and got to 60 million, hit the enforcer, game reset. There's a hole in the wall next to the game. Two holes, and some pretty foul language that I heard that night. And he came back again with a patch program. Thank you, Christian. And hit 100 million again in 2014. And ignore that incorrect line that says it had the bug because it didn't. So, I don't know, was Mark Hoff the guy that came up with this gauntlet idea?
I want to say yes. It had been floated around on the internet forums on various gaming sites, but I want to say Ken House probably hatched the idea, and Mark Hoff ran with it and started the guide book website.
Mark is the most reverent historian, busybody, game daddy guy. He works with Walter at Twin Galaxies, and a lot of the stuff that's happening now, for Robotron and other games, he seems to be the organizer. And he put it together where 4 people simultaneously in January of 15 would start at the same time with an attempt for all 4 players to wrap the game at 100 million and go on. And when I heard about this, one of the players, it was either Ken or you, missed an attempt to hit 100 million because their lives wrapped. That was Ken. The number of lives that you have remaining, it shows up to 7 on the screen, and then it just keeps them internally in a single byte, which is 8 bits. So at what number do they go back to 0, computer geeks? 256. Yeah. Yeah, 255, you win an extra man and your game's about to end. And different players had different strategies of having someone counting their lives and other ways, and they were terribly inaccurate. And I'm watching these on Twitch, they also were taping up the number of 10 millions. There'd be a 1 or a 10 million, 20 million, 30 million taped up on a post-it so that the camera that was showing the score would know, where you are in that run to 100 million. And I happen to have more time on my hands than I probably should have, and started looking at the listings and going, gee, can we help with some of this? And I ended up creating the tie-dye software. And I ended up doing it in the same way Christian did it. I didn't have the time to reconstruct the whole development environment. So I found a way to really quickly put together a bunch of tools that I had and stuff that I could find. And I've got a 12-minute video that we might run later or in another session that kind of shows it. And was able to come up with and release a new version of Robotron. It was in November of 15 that I let it go right around Thanksgiving. It adds this lives counter, and we're showing 26 lives. And it takes the scoring to 8 digits, which it is here, but you can't see. And then on January 30th, 4 players. It was Ken, David, Dane Tullock, he's a pro player from Canada. And coolest thing here, Greg Hansen, he's in his young 20s, I think, was born 14 or 15 years after Robotron came out. So the value of the play of the game, he has learned not only to play it, embrace it, and get good, but to become a master player. And the tie-dye had a few other fixes, including it gave you a way to practice the Goldilocks mode. If you go in and change an adjustment, it sets it to 99,000,009 something, and you can go in and see it. One of our 4 players, who is David, went in and practiced that, and unfortunately Ken didn't. And about 24 hours into it, Dane and Greg had dropped out with really respectable scores. Ken and David were still going at it. And really interestingly, the points per hour, the millions per hour, when they were doing it simultaneously, was much higher than their millions per hour. So they each took around 24 hours or more to get 100 million when they were doing it on their own. When they were doing it competitively, it was like 22 and a half, David? 22 hours and 15 minutes, and Ken was much lower on his time. They both wanted to be the first one to hit the 100 million while they were competing. And they, again, almost a day after it started, and Eugene and I did some commentary. This was the Twitch channel where we were able to use Skype and dial in and watch the 4 players on the 4 screens with their games and their progress, give commentary, and then answer questions that people would type in their questions, and we would talk or whatever, and it was a whole interesting experience. So David hit 100 million first, Ken hit 100 million and did not pay attention to his lives counter, and did not have the strategy in his head for what to do if it started to get bad. And we're watching it, and I'm actually commenting through it. We don't think he sees it, what's going to happen, I hope he notices. And then his lives wrap, and a big F-bomb, and his game ends about 2 or 3 minutes later, where he's at a hard part of the game with no extra lives. And that I think David might get good enough to fight back from there one day, but I don't think even he's there yet. So that was, that's just been amazing. And then David went on, this is the 3rd prime, because in the gauntlet in January, he played through 36 hours and stopped at 150 million. Okay, then because he wanted his hands to hurt a lot or something, he set the difficulty to 10 and played around with it to see how long can I maintain that. And after he realized he was good enough to play at difficulty 10 forever, he went and did a 24-hour session.
Well, that's difficulty 5 right there.
Right.
That's what I wanted.
Right, he did a 24-hour session at difficulty 10, and then after that, he went and said, let's see how long I can humanly stay awake and have my hands not fall off. And he played 43 hours. He put in a quarter, which is that quarter, which has a date of 1984, the destruction of Kidz.
And it was due to players like him that arcade owners didn't make any money on this.
And he played for 43 hours, 44 minutes, 50 seconds to 180 million. And I met David for the first time about 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago when he was in Chicago, 4th of July weekend, and that's your Defender marquee, but of course Mark Hoff sent several marquees to be signed to give to the winner of the next Robotron golf.
Right, so yeah, why does he get a Defender marquee for doing Robotron?
Okay, Ryan, I see you. You're done catching Pokemon. Oh, that's not Ryan. That's really funny. My bad eyesight and somebody that has enough of a similar image. Okay, Ryan he's catching them all.
He's able.
This is Ryan. Again, when you grow up with a game designer, you grow up with a basement full of machines. And Ryan is playing this Robotron at this point when he's pretty young, but he didn't have any interest in the game. He moved on to the next game and didn't play it for a week or a month or a year. But, that lighting's great. Ryan has discovered Robotron in the last 6 months, and he's been playing it. He's over 500,000 now. Doing really well, and he loves the game. And it's just been a great, it's great to see that Greg was able to get into the game long after it was gone, and that Ryan and new players find the action, the strategic simulation, and the adrenaline to just be so exciting that it's something that in the world of all these beautiful games with 50 scenes and 20 modes and 50 hours of unique gameplay, that this can still hold up, and we are so proud of that.
Unfortunately, we've completely bumped up against the next section. We've run a half hour over, so. What were you saying about?
Every question about Robotron has been asked and answered, so we're good.
Everybody stand up,
Yeah.
clap your hands.
So we could take some questions out in the hallway.